After nearly a decade of buildup, it's hard to ignore how many people walked away from the Stranger Things finale feeling unsatisfied. Even among viewers who thought the ending was fine, or at least not outright bad, there was still a lingering sense of disappointment that never quite went away. When an audience starts theorizing about a secret ending, that usually says more than any review score ever could. Welcome to Luna Marin Reviews, a channel where I take a closer look at the stories we love, what works about them, and where they fall short. In this video, I'm talking about the final battle of Stranger Things and why it left so many viewers feeling underwhelmed, even if the ending itself wasn't outright bad. Since Season 1, Stranger Things has been escalating toward one unavoidable promise, an ultimate confrontation with the Upside Down that would justify everything the show had been building. Each season increased the scope of the threat, not just visually, but structurally. The danger expanded from something intimate and localized into a force that felt systemic, intelligent, and persistent. By the time the final season arrived, the expectation wasn't simply a bigger fight, but a decisive one that would feel earned after years of buildup. That expectation is important, because escalation creates a contract with the audience. When a story keeps raising the stakes, it teaches viewers to anticipate a climax that reflects that growth. Stranger Things trained its audience to believe that the Upside Down was becoming harder to contain, harder to fight, and more deeply rooted in the world with each passing season. The final battle, then, needed to feel like the moment where that accumulated threat finally reached its breaking point. Instead, it arrives and ends with surprising speed, leaving behind a sense that the payoff never quite matched the promise. The final confrontation presents itself as the largest conflict the show has ever staged. A massive creature emerges, Hawkins is already scarred and collapsing, and the characters are positioned as humanity's last defense. On paper, this sounds like the culmination of everything Stranger Things has been moving toward. In execution, however, the fight resolves far too quickly for what it represents. From the moment the creature fully engages to the moment it is defeated, the battle lasts only a few minutes. There is no prolonged struggle, no drawn-out sense of survival, and very little uncertainty about the outcome once the fight begins. What makes this feel especially underwhelming is the imbalance at the center of the confrontation. The show frames the enemy as a giant, kaiju-scale entity tied to an entire dimension of corruption, while the opposing side consists of a small group of humans armed with improvised weapons and sheer determination. The problem isn't that the humans win, but how easily they do so. After years of being told that this force is adaptive, ancient, and overwhelming, watching it fall with minimal resistance undermines its credibility as a final antagonist. This issue becomes more pronounced when compared to earlier seasons. Previous finales often fell harder, even when the stakes were technically lower. Characters struggled longer, made riskier choices, and paid visible prices for survival. The final season, despite having the highest stakes of the series, feels safer in comparison. The threat looks larger, but the effort required to overcome it feels smaller. That disconnect creates a sense that the show scaled up the visuals without scaling up the difficulty. The absence of meaningful casualties only deepens this problem. Throughout the final battle, characters are placed in situations that strongly suggest permanent consequences. There are multiple moments where survival feels unlikely, where the story seems poised to take something away in order to reinforce the danger of the situation. Instead, these moments resolve into fake-outs, near misses, and last-second escapes. By the time the battle ends, everyone who truly matters walks away alive. This lack of loss changes how the entire confrontation is perceived. When a threat fails to claim anything significant at the height of its power, it retroactively weakens itself. The Upside Down has spent years inflicting trauma, separation, and death. Yet, in its final stand, it proves unable to secure a single lasting victory. Without real consequences, the fight loses emotional weight, and the victory feels less like survival and more like inevitability. There's also a tonal shift in how the threat functions. Earlier versions of the Upside Down were effective because they operated on multiple levels. They invaded minds, twisted relationships, and lingered long after physical confrontations ended. The final battle reduces that complexity into a straightforward physical conflict. Once the danger becomes something that can simply be burned, shot, or overpowered, it loses the unsettling presence that once defined it. Spectacle alone cannot carry a climax. A massive creature and widespread destruction can create excitement, but without sustained resistance or cost, they fail to create tension. The final battle leans heavily on scale while neglecting endurance. The fight ends before it has time to exhaust the characters, the audience, or the story itself. Instead of feeling like a desperate last stand, it plays out more like a final obstacle that needs to be cleared before the epilogue can begin. The most frustrating part is that the groundwork for a stronger ending already existed. The show had spent years establishing the Upside Down as something that could not be easily defeated, something that adapted to human interference and punished overconfidence. The finale, however, resolves that threat in a way that feels tidy and controlled. The world is saved, the danger is neutralized, and the characters are allowed to move on largely intact. Another element that makes the final battle feel strangely hollow is the absence of the very creatures that defined the Upside Down in the first place. Throughout the series, the threat was never limited to a single entity. Demogorgons, Demodogs, and Demobats were not just monsters of the week, they were extensions of a larger ecosystem. They showed how deeply the Upside Down had rooted itself into the world and how overwhelming it could be when it acted in numbers rather than isolation. Earlier seasons made it clear that these creatures were drawn to conflict and expansion. When gates opened or control intensified, the Upside Down responded by flooding the area with life forms designed to hunt, overwhelm, and spread fear. This made the threat feel persistent and uncontainable. Even when one creature was defeated, it never felt like a true victory because more could always follow. In the final battle, that sense of scale is almost entirely missing. The fight focuses on one massive creature, but the world around it feels oddly empty. There is no swarm, no pressure from multiple angles, no sense that the characters are being surrounded or worn down. The Upside Down, a dimension previously shown to attack through sheer volume and relentlessness, suddenly limits itself to a single front. This makes the conflict feel smaller, not larger, despite the increase in visual scale. The absence of these creatures also removes an important layer of tension. Demogorgons and their variants forced characters into constant movement, improvisation, and sacrifice. They made escape difficult and survival uncertain. Without them, the final fight becomes more controlled and predictable. The characters are able to focus on one threat at a time, which lowers the sense of chaos that should define an apocalyptic confrontation. What's especially frustrating is that the story itself sets up the expectation that these creatures should be present. The Upside Down has always operated as a hive-like system, where different entities serve different functions. Removing that complexity in the final battle strips the enemy of its identity. Instead of feeling like a living dimension pushing back against intrusion, it comes across as a single monster acting alone. By sidelining the Demogorgons and other creatures, the finale loses the opportunity to make the battle feel truly overwhelming. A final confrontation should feel crowded, desperate, and exhausting. The absence of these elements makes the Upside Down feel less like an invading world and more like a boss encounter that can be cleared once the main target falls. Because of that, the final battle doesn't feel like the natural conclusion of a long, escalating conflict. It feels like a moment the story needed to get past in order to reach its ending. The result is a climax that looks impressive but lacks the emotional and narrative weight necessary to justify its place at the end of a decade-long journey. Stranger Things ends with warmth, closure, and reflection, all of which work well on their own. The problem is that the final battle meant to enable that closure doesn't carry the same strength. After years of build-up, escalation, and expectation, watching the ultimate threat fall so quickly and without real loss leaves the conclusion feeling smaller than it should have been. A more effective resolution would have come from committing fully to Vecna as the final antagonist, and allowing the Upside Down to function as the world he controls rather than the enemy that needs to be physically destroyed. By the time the final season begins, Vecna has already proven himself to be the most personal and narratively grounded threat the series has introduced. He understands the characters, targets their weaknesses, and operates with a sense of purpose that no other antagonist in the show ever matched. Vecna works as a final villain because his conflict with the group is rooted in choice rather than scale. Unlike a massive creature, he doesn't rely on size or destruction to feel threatening. His power comes from manipulation, patience, and psychological pressure. The show repeatedly demonstrates that he wins by breaking people before he ever harms them physically. That approach aligns far more closely with what Stranger Things has always done best, turning fear inward and making survival feel personal rather than mechanical. Positioning Vecna as the sole focus of the final battle would also have allowed the story to avoid the problem of reducing the Upside Down to a single, killable monster. Instead of staging a short kaiju fight, the finale could have centered on a prolonged confrontation where Vecna actively controls the environment, the creatures within it, and the emotional state of the characters. The danger wouldn't come from how big the enemy is, but from how deeply he can corner the group with no clear escape. This approach would also give meaning to the absence or presence of other creatures. Rather than being sidelined, Demogorgons and other entities could function as extensions of Vecna's will, applying constant pressure while he remains just out of reach. That layered threat would force the characters to make sacrifices, split their attention, and confront the possibility that not everyone makes it through. The fight would feel earned because it would exhaust the characters over time instead of resolving in minutes. Most importantly, making Vecna the final antagonist preserves the idea that the Upside Down cannot simply be erased through force. Defeating Vecna wouldn't mean destroying the dimension itself. It would mean cutting off its most dangerous influence on the human world. That distinction matters, because it keeps the Upside Down frightening even in defeat. The characters wouldn't win by overpowering darkness, but by surviving it and limiting its reach. By the end, victory could still be achieved, but at a visible cost. Vecna's defeat would feel significant because it would require coordination, loss, and irreversible change. The story could still end with closure and hope, but that hope would be grounded in sacrifice rather than convenience. In choosing to split focus between Vecna and a massive physical embodiment of the Upside Down, the finale weakens both. Committing to Vecna alone would have allowed the final battle to stay personal, tense, and emotionally consistent with the rest of the series' qualities that mattered far more than scale ever could. In the end, the issue with the final battle isn't that Stranger Things chose hope over despair or that the characters survive. It's that the resolution doesn't reflect the weight of what came before it. After years of escalation, fear, and loss, the ultimate confrontation resolves too quickly and too cleanly for a threat that was framed as unstoppable. The danger looks enormous, but the effort required to overcome it never matches that scale. By sidelining the ecosystem of the Upside Down, minimizing casualties, and resolving the conflict through a brief physical showdown, the finale turns a decade-long buildup into something surprisingly manageable. What once felt invasive and relentless becomes something that can be confronted head-on and defeated in minutes. That shift doesn't erase the emotional moments of the ending, but it does soften the impact of the journey that led there. Stranger Things succeeds in giving its characters closure, and for many viewers, that will be enough. But closure and culmination are not the same thing. A final battle should test everything the characters have learned and everything they are willing to lose. When that test feels restrained, the victory feels smaller than it should. The show will still be remembered for its characters, its atmosphere, and the way it captured fear through connection and vulnerability. The final fight, however, stands as a reminder that build-up only works when the payoff is willing to be just as bold. And in choosing safety over consequence, the finale leaves behind a conflict that ends not with devastation or sacrifice, but with a sense that it all should have been harder. If you enjoyed this video essay and want more analysis on series and character arcs, feel free to subscribe. I appreciate you spending the time here, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on the series finale in the comments. If you'd like to support me in another way, I also design and sell original shirts and other creations on my Etsy shop, Luna Maren. You can find the link down in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.